So we're going to talk today about subconscious blocks or emotional blocks. These are interesting, and I do get clients sometimes who will call because they're pretty sure they have an emotional block or a subconscious block. That is absolutely possible and not necessarily so. That's the interesting thing about subconscious blocks or emotional blocks. Okay. The diagnosis of infertility, whatever that diagnosis might be that you receive, in the doctor's office, or it can even be that you've been trying to conceive naturally and it's been 6 months, 8 months, 9, 10 months, whatever, and you haven't conceived. And then there's that fear, oh my gosh, there must be something wrong. Something must be happening. And, so that can actually cause this worry impacts the subconscious mind. So the subconscious responds to emotion. So remembering that the language of the subconscious mind is imagination, it is emotion, it is metaphor, it's not logical, it's not linear, and there's really no time that happens in the subconscious mind. So, we, in our day-to-day lives, we live in a world that we need to measure. We need to know, what time do I need to be at work? What time is lunch? What time am I meeting clients? Things like that. What day is the weekend? When is my birthday? When is Christmas? When should we book our vacation? You can't just get online and book yourself a couple of weeks in Hawaii and not know when those weeks are. You can't just, oh, I think I'll go to Hawaii and then nothing, right? So that's the way our day-to-day lives work. That's our linear left brain conscious mind world. But in the subconscious mind is impacted by emotion, but also, if you think about it, by boredom as well, or repetition. So if we get kind of bored, things can just sneak into the subconscious mind. A lot of times when we're watching TV, we'll tune out the commercials, and that's just exactly what they want you to do. They want you to tune out the commercials, and then the commercial just goes straight into your head. Okay, then you don't even realize it's there until you're at the supermarket and you're buying whatever product that it is. You're buying sunscreen and you live in the North Pole, things like that. That is one of the ways of impressing the subconscious mind. So we can kind of almost bore the conscious mind out of the way, or the conscious mind, is daydreaming or whatever that is. So if you're frightened, if you've been trying to get pregnant naturally for, several months and you haven't, there's a repetition there, and there's a fear that's attached to that. Or it may not be a fear initially, but then it becomes a fear, which is a strong emotion, which impacts the subconscious. And then hypnosis itself works with compounding. So you can compound the positive, but also the negative compounds. So that's why I say a lot of times that what I'm doing is dehypnotizing people almost more than hypnotizing them, because sometimes there are things that we need to clear that, are stacked up there in the subconscious mind. The interesting thing about that is, well, there's a few interesting things. We don't need to know what they are, and we don't need to know if they're there. So whether or not you have a subconscious block doesn't matter as far as the hypnosis goes. We can clear those without knowing that they're there, or if we do know that they're there, not knowing what they are. We may find out, we may not, and it doesn't matter, because it is the result that you're looking for. It is what, something goes away. So for example, someone has a public speaking fear, and there could be some kind of subconscious block there, and we release that block, and the fear of public speaking is gone, but we don't necessarily know why it was there, or if it was there. But it doesn't matter, because now that's out of the way. Okay. What we might think would be a subconscious block may very well not be. Oftentimes what we think would be a subconscious block, if we can remember it consciously, it's not usually a subconscious block. It is possible that something, especially if you remember some kind of trauma or something that is like, really directly affects, is really aligned with, the specific subject of fertility or infertility. but it can also be something that maybe brings up the same feelings, or is kind of general, but somehow the subconscious mind has connected it in with fertility issues. So for example, a client many years ago had a breakup with her, I don't know if it was a boyfriend or husband or whatever it was, and she had ended up getting an abortion. And she knew that she had had the abortion, but what ended up coming up in her hypnosis was not the abortion, because she knew that had happened. She knew that had to happen at that time. But it was, I guess they were on some airplane and this whole breakup thing was happening, and it connected in all sorts of ways that you just wouldn't have expected. So it was more the breakup on the airplane piece that was causing the block. Okay. And we often think that abortion is going to be a block, or we think that we're going to know that happened. And then a lot of times women will think that they're being punished for that it's, well, this happened, and so therefore now this is happening. I can't get pregnant because of a past abortion. Correlation is not causation, but we sometimes think of it that way. And women tend to be really, how can I say, open to, in a sense, punishing themselves. They take the responsibility for fertility issues, even if the diagnosis is 100% male factor. Women still tend to take the responsibility, and they make the decisions, they do the research, they look into the possibilities, they end up telling their partner, take these supplements, or, you're going to go to acupuncture as well, or, we're going to do this, and, that kind of thing. So women do tend to take that responsibility. And so it doesn't really make any difference, what else might be happening. The subconscious block could come, so far out of left field that you just wouldn't expect it at all. Okay. So with the compounding that occurs, sometimes something can happen in life and then something similar comes along and compounds it, but it's not the same thing. So a subconscious block to infertility or to fertility could be, could start out with being a little child and, maybe being left alone because, mommy went to the store and, for some reason, it just impacted you. It's amazing what can impact the subconscious mind, the simplest little thing, or something that it doesn't seem like it would be a big deal that mommy went to the store and came back in, half an hour. But for whatever reason, if it upset you or something else was going on, the subconscious mind can really perceive that as something it needs to deal with. And the subconscious is protective. So the thing with that is it tends to work in a very sweeping manner. Okay, this happened. And so to prevent that from happening again, we will just, obliterate fertility or something like that. And that's a lot of, overkill. Okay. Now it's not likely to do that because mommy left and went to the grocery store, but it can definitely happen as other things reinforce that issue. So if you think about being a little child, little like 2, 3, and you don't really, understand, you don't really have a lot of the language abilities yet. And even if you can talk, you don't really, you just don't, you're just little. And so if you got really, really upset, down the line, something else can bring up those upsetting feelings. So let's say 3, 4 years later, you fall off a swing and you get, you're hurt, you're upset, and it can reinforce those feelings that happened back when you were, littler and mom had to leave. And so the subconscious mind starts to kind of pay attention to different things that are causing you to feel that way. Down the line, let's say you're 13 and, it's your first school dance, or and something happens, or the popular girls, don't include you in something, whatever, it doesn't matter, but it can cause those feelings again. And then that compounds it, compounds it, compounds it. They're not the same things, but they can still have the same results, the same response. So then down the line, something happens a little later, and it could be something like that experience with that abortion, or it could be, something, I feel like it could be anything. And the subconscious ends up, I hate to say deciding, because sometimes it's hard to use words to describe the subconscious, but doesn't really decide because it's not logical, but it can, in protecting you, just say, okay, so this feeling, this causes this feeling, and this causes this feeling, and all of this ended up connecting with this feelings about the fertility issue. So let's just not get pregnant. Let's just block that out, or even the desire to get pregnant. If some other things have happened in the past, and it's amazing how they can get connected. It is not logical. It is not what we would expect to happen. I mean, it can be, but so often it isn't. And it can be the mildest thing that we might think that happened, that the subconscious mind has a strong reaction to. And yet something that we would think would be hugely, hugely traumatizing, or, be some kind of a really big deal, the subconscious mind dismisses it, or just doesn't respond or react to it in that way. That is why the great thing is that we don't have to know. We don't have to know if there's one, what it is, if there's more than one. Like I say, sometimes there are, and sometimes we do find out, and sometimes not. You've got the book. It's conceivable that you should have a copy of that with this course. And I talk a little bit about that in that book, about releasing some of these blocks. And there are interactive processes that we can use to do so. And that's where the one-on-one hypnosis comes in. And then there are other ways, and that's what we're going to do tonight, is a process that will help cleanse and clear your subconscious mind, remove, any blocks, and, that kind of thing. So the diagnosis, the reaction to the diagnosis, things that don't seem to in any way, shape, or form be related to the diagnosis or to infertility, all of these things can be contributing. A lot of times what I see will be issues with mother issues, where sometimes mother's very young, and so maybe 18, 19, she has this baby. There's a lot of stress, there's a lot of pressure around it. She doesn't want to have a baby, she's forced to have a baby, things like that can happen. And then of course everything gets dumped on the child. So there can be that unwanted child feeling. There can be that blame. It's the child's fault, but it wasn't anybody's fault that they were conceived. Okay. But that can happen. And so then the subconscious is very painful. And so the subconscious can then protect you from something like that by saying, okay, well, we won't have any children. And then that way, we'll just cut this off, protect ourselves from anything like this happening. We can be very aware of something like that something like that might happen. Or, in psychology, they talk about the cycle of violence. And you'll see it in families, generation after generation. It's abusive, it's brutal. There's a lot of there can be mental abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. And it's a cycle, and it, perpetuates. We constantly have this from one generation to the next. But at the same time, some people totally break out of that, and they may realize what's going on, but sometimes they don't even realize it. In some cases, people think that their childhood was, normal, whatever that word means. They don't even realize just how bad it was. However, they still make those changes for their own children. So we can consciously break that cycle. Sometimes we break it, but we're not consciously aware of it. And sometimes, even when we know it, we still will continue. So it just depends. Everyone's different. Everyone's brain is different. Everyone's experience is different. The dynamics are always different. There's culture and there is circumstances, there is environment, there is birth order. You ever talk to 5 kids of the same, alcoholic, abusive parent and get 5 different experiences? Because that comes down to personality, that comes down to who wants to be in denial, who wants to confront it, who wants to, simply knows it there, but wants to ignore it, who wants to minimalize it, various ways that people respond to things. So this is something to keep in mind when you think about the dimensions of a subconscious block or an emotional block. An emotional block pretty much is a subconscious block, but I, will kind of, switch back and forth a little bit and use them interchangeably, mainly just because it's various ways that people refer to them, themselves. So there's the mother aspect that can be an issue. And I've seen, people have really serious physiological issues that impact their fertility. And then in resolving the subconscious blocks, the mother issues, being able to release that, the rest of it just kind of clears up and this baby is able to come through. Then beyond that, beyond the mother things, it can be a handicapped child, perhaps a sibling, or perhaps someone who's close in the family. And this often will happen to, folks that work in schools with handicapped kids or occupational therapists, because they can see the worst that something can be. And it can be very difficult to deal with a very high needs individual. And the level of needs can vary. So sometimes there's more than one, experience that happens with that high needs or special needs, or however you want to call that. Sometimes the person has been in a position to have to care for the younger siblings, or sometimes it's an older sibling. There can also be issues where one of the children, one of the siblings maybe has an illness and then seems to get all the attention. And then the person who is not ill feels jealous or feels left out, and at the same time feels guilty, feels ashamed. So various things like this can end up resulting in subconscious blocks and can definitely relate to fertility as well as, other things. Speaking to the doctor, a lot of times people will go to see a doctor because these days, really, a lot of people think that's just what you do. If you want to get pregnant, you go ask permission, you go ask the doctor, or you go get this checkup. And, back in the day, people just stopped their birth control or it seemed like it was just more of a natural thing. There was a lot less permission, I would almost say, around that. But if they get to a doctor, and it just depends on the situation, if a person is not expecting anything to be wrong and they think, I'm going to go to the doctor is going to check me out, tell me to go ahead, and then something comes back, that they do a workup and something comes back, maybe it's, something to do with the hormonal levels, who knows? Or sometimes the doctors can just get caught right up with the age and they just drop a ton of frightening information or statistics on someone who's not expecting it. Nothing against the doctors. This is hypnosis, though. And so when people don't realize how this might come across, if you get a diagnosis or you hear information you're not expecting, it's a startle, it's a shock. And that bypasses your conscious mind, okay? It bypasses that critical faculty that is basically a gate that helps to keep things from just flooding into our subconscious mind. Something like a startle or a shock can bypass that critical faculty of the mind, and then the direct suggestion goes straight in. A suggestion is going to be more powerful based on how emotional it is. And so something like that is very emotional. It's very frightening. It can cause anger, whatever that is. And so that in and of itself can create a block. And then the basically what happens is the subconscious mind, because that critical faculty functions as a gate or a door, the suggestion gets passed and then the door closes. And so that's how we end up with a block in a situation like that. And this is kind of the same thing as what happens with, like I mentioned, commercials. The critical faculty is basically bored out of the way or distracted out of the way. And so suggestions from commercials can get into, and it can be, I mean, a speech that someone's giving, whatever else it might be. If your mind starts to wander, your conscious mind, then you can pick things up subconsciously and you're not even sure, hey, how do I know that? Where did that come from? Now, it can be the reaction to something that you were told from a doctor, or, in all sorts of various circumstances. The reaction, if we react and we get angry or we get upset and we cry or we, get really scared, again, that's emotion. It's really strong emotion. So that impacts the subconscious mind. Okay. So I think you're probably getting the idea that there are a lot of things that can cause subconscious blocks. And there's so many variations, so many possibilities, so many examples pop into my head, just in explaining this to you. And I don't want to get off track by giving you all of these specific examples, but similar to what I said with the one client with the airplane situation.